Let's go back a few months. When FreedomToons made this video on the recent tax cuts, I didn't know how to make videos. But now I do.
Unfortunately, you don't know how to make political arguments.
Let's start with the most common argument. The rich are getting way more in tax cuts than the poor. And actually, this one's true, but that's because the rich pay way more in taxes.
The wealthy should be paying more in taxes than the poor middle class.
Why is it exactly that you believe the rich should be obligated to pay more in taxes? Is it because you think they use or take advantage of government services more than everyone else? Or is it because you're simply jealous that they have more than you?
He acts like our progressive tax structure is unfair to the rich.
Well, here's the progressive tax structure as it currently works. The harder you work and the more income you make, the more that the government gets to take. So the harder you work, the less of the fruits of the hard work you get to keep. Does that seem fair at all?
As if they don't have massively higher levels of disposable income.
Yes, the rich typically have more income, but that doesn't mean they have more disposable income. All the income they earn goes into business investments, things that keep businesses operating or even potentially growing. And this benefits everyone because it creates jobs and opportunities for other people as well. But even if the rich did have more disposable income than everyone else, so how does that in any way give anyone else the right to take it from them?
I get this argument from libertarians a lot, that rich people are paying higher tax rates, so they're the victims and we need to cut taxes for the rich.
Well, actually, anytime someone has their money taken from them without their consent, government or anyone else, you have a victim.
What was going through his head when he made this argument? Just look at this picture. Aside from the completely inaccurate degree of taxation, who is supposed to feel sorry for the uber-rich guy there?
The people who understand that the rich person most likely gained that wealth through hard work, and that the money that's being taken from them will most likely go to social programs that support people who don't work.
For anyone who thinks that this is unfair to the rich and we need a flat tax system or to massively cut taxes on the rich, I'm going to explain why it's better to tax rich people than it is to tax poor people. Jessica makes $20 million a year and Rick makes $20,000 a year. If both of them pay a tax rate of 10%, then Jessica pays $2 million and Rick pays $2,000, leaving Jessica with $18 million and Rick with $18,000. Even though Jessica paid 1,000 times as much money as Rick, she will never have to worry about getting by. Just from that 1 year, she and her family are set for life. Meanwhile, the $2,000 that Rick lost could have helped him pay for food, rent, clothing, healthcare, or education. This is the diminishing marginal utility of money. The more money you have, the less you need it. For poor people to lose even a small amount of money can make a huge difference, whereas a wealthy person can pay a much higher amount of money and still be left with a lot more money than they'll ever need.
This appears to be a pretty good argument at first, but you have to consider what other information is being left out of this scenario. What immediately comes to mind is, how do each of these people earn the income that they do? Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that Jessica is a surgeon and that Rick is a cook at a fast food joint. Well, the thing about Jessica's job is that in her case, her job is life or death. If people don't get that surgery they need, they die. Also, her job requires a unique skill that most people don't have. This means that she's pretty valuable in terms of what it is that she does. Rick, on the other hand, has a skill that many people have that's not too difficult, and while I do enjoy my Big Mac, I wouldn't die without it. So his job is worth much less. Now, it's a well-known fact that the higher the reward of doing something, the more willing people are to do it. This is why Jessica's job would pay more than Rick's job. Jessica's job is not only higher stakes, but also less people are able to do it. Therefore, most people would feel that her job does in fact warrant a higher reward for doing it. So what would happen if we took the advice of PoliDice here and gave her the higher tax rate? Well, this would diminish the reward that she would receive for the job that she does, and therefore diminish the motivation of anyone who would possibly want to do that job. By that same token, if we were to relax the taxes on Rick and therefore increase his reward, well then more people would be motivated to do these jobs that aren't worth as much. So in this case, more people are gravitating towards jobs that aren't as important, which is a loss for society as a whole. Second important question to ask is, what exactly are they getting out of this money that they're paying? Taxes are meant to fund public services that the government provides. However, each of these individuals pays different amounts, but they're essentially getting the same services. In fact, if anything, Rick's getting more services because the less wealth you have, the more likely you are to get on government assistance. So it turns out, even with a flat tax rate, it's usually the rich who are screwed over to the benefit of the poor. I mean, I really could spend all day on this, but the point being that the picture PoliDice is painting here isn't complete.
Some more extreme libertarians will make the argument that neither of them should be paying taxes at all, or that they should be paying really, really low rates. but then we'd have to disable the social programs that help Rick get by, which of course is exactly what right-wingers want.
Well, not necessarily. Many libertarians and conservatives are both adamant supporters of charity and other voluntary forms of humanitarian aid. What we're opposed to is forcing people to fund these things at gunpoint.
20% pay nearly 90% of all federal income tax. So why aren't taxes being cut for the lower class? Because you can't cut taxes for people who aren't paying any, you dingus.
You dingus.
They do pay taxes, but more importantly, this was marketed to the American people as a tax cut for the middle class. That's what Republicans sold this as. That's what Republicans told us it would be.
Well, it kind of is. You see, the middle class is actually pretty screwed over by the progressive tax system as well, because it creates an artificial wealth ceiling for them. Make over this amount and the government gets to take more of it. By removing that wealth ceiling, these tax cuts will benefit the middle class as well.
Imagine if Republicans just came out and said, why, actually, yes, we are trying to cut taxes for the rich and corporations. Don't worry about how we're going to pay for it. We'll just take away your Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, working class deductions, subsidies, etc. I would love that, actually, if Republicans just told the American people who they really are and lost every single election.
By that same token, I'd appreciate some honesty from the left as well. Imagine how many elections they'd win if they came out and said, our plan is to take money from people who work and give it to people who don't, at gunpoint.
Let's move on to a criticism from good old Liz Warren. She never disappoints.
We could totally forgive every penny of student loan debt with the amount of money congressional Republicans are using to slash the corporate tax rate.
In other words, why are we letting some people keep their own money when we could be giving other people free stuff? I could understand wanting student loan forgiveness if you signed on the dotted line not knowing that you'd have to pay the money back, but when you borrow, at some point you have to return. Now look, I totally get it. College is ridiculously expensive these days. But there's nothing to prevent you from attending a community college for 2 to 3 years before you transfer to a 4-year university for your degree.
Yep, he's right about that. That's actually what I did. And you're really not missing much either. There really isn't that much of a difference between community college and universities anyway. In fact, if anything, community colleges usually have that small town charm that big universities don't.
And yeah, I can tell you from personal experience that living with your parents for 2 years after you've already graduated while all your friends are away at university, it's not a lot of fun. It's actually a pretty big sacrifice. But it's a sacrifice which myself and many other people have made to avoid debt, and it would be extremely unfair to make us, or anyone else for that matter, pay off your debt through our taxes.
Another point that Seamus doesn't bring up but I feel is relevant. As a college student, the decisions that you make can help out big time with your finances. For example, you probably didn't need that semester in Europe to get your liberal arts degree, and I sure as hell shouldn't have to pay for any bad decisions you make.
Do you believe in equal opportunity? Do you believe that somebody born poor should have the same opportunity to succeed as somebody born rich? Apparently no, you don't. You would rather deny people access to higher education, or at least saddle them with crippling debt for trying to get an education that they need to compete in the modern economy.
Well, given that Seamus just explained a way for the less wealthy to obtain a higher education without going into debt, I would disagree.
And no, not everyone can just afford going to community college for 2 years and transferring in. Even for community college, still a lot of money, and then they self-transfer in to pay 2 years of that tuition.
Well, I'm not the richest person in the world, and even I was able to afford community college just by working between semesters. The reason I had that opportunity was because businesses had the capital and resources available to provide me with that opportunity, something that your precious taxes and regulations are going to take away.
That's still going to be an obscene amount of money. Maybe you could afford it to do so, but not everyone is so privileged.
It's not really a matter of being privileged, it's mostly a matter of hard work and managing your finances.
Now, do rich kids have to set up for a community college? Do they have to just go to a community college and then transfer into a state school? No, they can go to the most elite and well-connected private colleges in the country with summers abroad if they want.
You don't really need all that stuff though. I mean, sure, it's nice, but your employer really only cares if you have the degree and the education. They could give 2 scratches on my left ass cheek if you did a semester in Europe, or if you were the star football player, or if you're the most popular guy in your frat.
There's a reason that these countries clobber the U.S. in terms of social mobility. Somebody born poor there doesn't have to worry about how they're going to afford an education.
Well, I mean, I did struggle a bit to afford college. It took me 4 years to earn a 2-year degree just because I had to take so many breaks to save up the money. But if it means I get to keep all the money I earn with a new job I get with a degree, I'm more than happy about it. I take that over a system where I have to hand over my money to government any day. And I feel you, along with a lot of other people, are putting too much emphasis on college as a path up in life. There's also trades going into the military. It's not like the poor are screwed for life because they can't afford to go to college.
Oh, and what does it say about your values to argue, well, I was screwed over by the system, so now everyone else has to be screwed over by it too?
Having to go to community college instead of university is considered being screwed over to you, and you want to talk about privilege.
It's like when people say, oh, I make $12 an hour and you want people flipping burgers to make $15 an hour, even though you'd be making more money too.
You'd also be getting replaced with a robot as well.
If you care about more about personal resentment than making the world a better place, then you need to reevaluate your priorities.
Mr. Strawman, give me a break!
Yeah, I don't believe Seamus was against student loan forgiveness on the grounds that he's butthurt about having to go to community college instead of university. It was probably more on the grounds that forcing other people to pay for other people's free shit against their will at gunpoint is immoral.
There's literally a tax cut for people who own private jets in this bill.
So on a surface level, I kinda get Hassan's outrage here, but unfortunately, I don't think he's thought this through. Imagine, for a moment, that a rich person wasn't able to afford a private jet without this tax cut. Boo-hoo! Who cares if some rich guy doesn't get his own jet, right?
Wrong.
That is
Because if the rich guy doesn't buy a jet, that means the salesman didn't sell a jet, the manufacturer didn't move a jet, and their employees didn't get to build another jet. This happens enough times, and the company which creates and distributes the planes goes bankrupt, and everyone involved is out of work.
Just to expand upon what Seamus said, there's also the mines and foundries that produce the steel needed to build that jet, the refineries that make the kerosene for it, and the restaurants where all those employees go to lunch. This is the thing that PoliDice people who think like him don't understand. There's a bigger picture to all of this. When you fuck over certain people in an economy, it has this domino effect onto other people as well.
Real nice.
I was baffled the first time I saw this. FreedomToons is justifying these tax cuts for the rich with Keynesian economics.
Actually, a Keynesian defense would probably be something along the lines of, let's purposefully destroy rich people's jets just so that they have to buy new ones.
I am shook by how backwards that is. If, like me, you're a Keynesian who wants to stimulate aggregate demand, then you need to make sure that the people with the highest propensity to consume have more money, as in the poor and working class.
What makes you so confident that it's the poor and working class that have the highest propensity to spend? Once one set of needs are satisfied, another set of needs just comes right along to replace it.
They won't be buying private jets, they'll be buying cars, houses, tickets, games, all sorts of things.
But as Seamus just explained a moment ago, a lot of those people get the money that they need to buy those things from helping rich people get their jets. You're painting a dichotomy where there isn't one.
Let's go back to your position on student debt. What do you think will create more demand and jobs? The elimination of student debt, freeing up millions of people financially and incentivizing more people to gain education skills, or a private jet tax cut?
I'd go with the private jet tax cut. Reason being is that in the former case, although my education is free, the job I get with that education is going to be less fruitful since I'm going to have more of my income taken. Whereas if private jets are cheaper, that would incentivize me to work hard to earn one.
Is the jet industry about to go bankrupt? Like, what is this?
I don't believe Seamus was trying to make the point that the jet industry is in any sort of danger of going bankrupt. The point he was trying to get across is that these very taxes that you claim help the middle class actually hurt them, because economies are complex systems.
Now, he could have made a supply-side argument, and I'm honestly shocked that he didn't, but I'll refute it anyways. The idea of supply-side economics is that wealth comes from private savings and private investment. So if we lift the burdens of taxes and regulations, then private enterprise will be free to create jobs, raise wages, lift people out of poverty, and innovate the best new technologies. None of this is true. Historically, there's been no correlation between the tax rate and job creation.
Well, generally speaking, the less money an employer is spending on taxes, the more money they have to hire people with. Also, the graph you just used is for GDP, not unemployment.
It didn't work under Brownback, it didn't work under Bush, not even under Reagan did it work. That famed 7% growth rate was the result of his military spending, and his promise that tax cuts would create more revenue than it lost was catastrophically wrong.
I'll leave a link in the description to a video done by Shane Killian, in which he debunks this point about Reagan's tax cuts way better than I ever could.
Wages don't rise with corporate profits either. Since the 70s and 80s, we've seen profits skyrocket while wages have stagnated.
You know what else skyrocketed in the 70s and 80s? Regulations. Regulations that made it more difficult to employ people. Regulations that made it more difficult to pay people.
But wait, what about those stories of companies raising wages after the Trump tax cuts? Most of these were pre-negotiated and had nothing to do with the cut.
So you're admitting that there are examples of employees getting paid more than they would ordinarily that has nothing to do with government?
But if you want taxes to be low, then it's really easy to turn around. You did what you were already going to do because of the cuts that would happen months after you decided to do it. And even if those small one-time bonuses were due to the cuts, it's only a fraction of a percent of the windfall going to a fraction of the workforce. Those $2 trillion of corporate taxes were worth more than $6,000 per person. So I'm really not impressed when 2% of the workforce gets a few $100s or even $1,000 in terms of a one-time bonus.
So first you're saying that these bonuses have nothing to do with the tax cuts. Now you're saying that they disprove the efficacy of the tax cuts in order to help the poor. Can you make up your mind, dude?
These cuts help lift people out of poverty? No, in fact, poor people get screwed over when their programs are inevitably cut to account for the massive deficit spikes.
You should probably know that charitable spending and humanitarian aid actually increases in countries that are more economically free.
And cool new products? No, most technological innovation can be traced back to government research, the military, NASA, and universities.
While it's true that the government did orchestrate this research, it was largely carried out by private sector contractors.
But what about the iPhone? True, Apple does make cool products, but does anyone actually believe that Apple was on the verge of bankruptcy before these cuts were passed?
Well, it's not just about avoiding bankruptcy, it's also about growth versus stagnation. Sure, a company that can pay off all its operating expenses can tread water and, break even, but if they're just barely breaking even, not earning much profit, there's not much funding left over to, grow their business or research new solutions. If the company was simply existing, not able to grow, that's not really good for society.
Another argument. Tax cuts are expensive. I don't even know where to begin with this one. Letting people keep their own money isn't expensive. This is total mental gymnastics. The left wants to spend on any and every program that sounds nice, despite the fact that we can't afford to pay for it. We want to spend less, and we're told that makes us big spenders because we want to pay less as well? The government spends $10 billion per day. That's absolutely insane, and we absolutely cannot afford to continue to spend this way. What we have is not a revenue problem, it is a spending problem. So with these tax cuts, will the government have enough money to spend as much as it does? No. But newsflash, it never has. That's why we're $20 trillion in debt. And the solution to that isn't to take more of people's money, it's to spend less of it.
Don't tell me that we can't afford our bare-bones safety net.
Well, what do you consider to be a bare-bones safety net? Because terms like bare-bones and basic are very open to interpretation. And have you ever heard the expression, you give them an inch, they take a mile? I think you'll find that in situations where people are entitled the basics, they'll try to stretch that interpretation as much as they can.
Let's compare our finances to countries far more prosperous social democracies with universal healthcare, education, mass transit, and a social safety net that puts ours to shame.
You should probably know that these so-called social democracies are actually more libertarian than we are. It's true, if you look at the Heritage Foundation's Index of Economic Freedom, they rank way higher than the United States. The only reason they can afford these so-called social safety nets is because their stronger economies means that they can afford to fund these things at a lower tax rate. This is because they don't have a shit ton of regulations hampering down their economy. For example, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Hungary, all these countries that are commonly cited as most social democracy, they don't have minimum wage.
So, no, we do not have a spending problem, we have a revenue problem.
I'd say there's still a spending problem. Even if we want to argue that some social safety nets are necessary, you still can't just spend willy-nilly on them. You still have to consider what is the most efficient and effective way to implement these social safety nets. Because there's a simple fact of life that doesn't change regardless of political system. You cannot use more resources than exist.
Because the Republican Party cares more about tax cuts for their donors than they do about the American people.
Which is why a lot of them donate to charity and support other voluntary forms of helping the poor. That's the thing. We're not against helping the poor. We're against helping the poor at gunpoint. That's what the people on the left don't seem to get. PoliDice, since you seem rather concerned about the less fortunate in this country, I'm curious. How much have you donated or how much time have you spent volunteering to help these people? I've done quite a bit, but I'm curious how much you have done. And thank you very much for watching. This has been Philosophossum, making stupidity play dead. Have a good one.